Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories Podcast. My name is Tim Hannon.
I'm Steve Wirt.
This week, we're joined by Dave Jordan. He's the co-author of a book called Cobra, A Life of Baseball and Brotherhood, about the life of late Pirates Hall of Famer Dave Parker. It's a really, really fascinating book. Highly recommend it. So many great stories. And when we talk to Dave, he gets into some of those stories and he gets into a lot of really interesting insight on the process of him writing this book with Dave Parker. So we hope you enjoy this interview. The book itself is available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble and other bookstores. We'll also have links in the show description for where you can get it. So like we said, please go out and get that book. You will not be disappointed. But for now, enjoy this interview with Dave Jordan. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, Tim, Steve, this is an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
So the book, for those who haven't read it, is Dave Parker telling his story in the first person, but Dave Jordan, you're the co-author. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, number one, how did you and him get connected? And number two, what was the process for writing this thing? Was it like him doing the talking, you doing the writing? Was it more collaborative writing? Can you just kind of walk us through that?
Absolutely. Well, I had been on my way home from a presentation I was giving with the baseball player John D'Acquisto. We'd written a book called Fastball John, and we were invited up to Cooperstown to make a presentation. On the way home, I was contacted by a mutual friend who told me that Parker had been trying to write an autobiography for the better part of a decade and a half. And for whatever reason, this writer fell out, that writer fell out, the deal wasn't good enough, whatever it was. And he was working with somebody who was basically charging like $2,000 a month to write his story and compose his book with him. And I called up Parker and I just said, I could get this done. I mean, the similarities, the background between him and D'Acquisto was pretty startling. They were both born in 1951. They were both part of the 1970 Major League Amateur Draft. They both debuted in 1973. So all the foundational research was there. And I told this to Parker, and Parker basically said, well, I kind of have an arrangement with somebody right now, this, that, and the other thing. I said, well, Godspeed, you have my number, you know where I am, and whatever happens, happens. That was in August of 2017. And then what happened was funny. In November of 2017, Ron Guidry signed a deal for his third autobiography. And, I mean, we know Ron Guidry, a Louisiana Lightning, near Hall of Famer, great Yankee, but he doesn't have the kind of story like Dave Parker does. It's not the same journey whatsoever. So I ended up calling up Parker and I said, Guidry's on his third book now. He just got a deal for his third book. And Parker was like, man, he's a milk drinker. So he had, he was just like, I know. And you have a much crazier story. He's like, I know I do. I'm like, well, what's going on with your book? He's like, oh, it fell by the wayside. I said, I'm going to send you a copy of Fastball John. Fastball John's 520 pages, and it's all about the peak of baseball in the 70s and 80s. You take a look at that. You tell me if you want me, because I can get yours done if you want to get it done. And I'm not going to charge you $2,000 a month to do it. And he read it, and then a week, 2 weeks later, he called me up, and he said, who do you like this weekend? Because if you know anything about Parker, he loves football more than anything in the world. And he's a big Bengals fan. Anthony Munoz, he counts among his best friends, and Kenny Anderson, all those guys in town, because Parker's a Cincinnati guy. And so we just talked football from early December 2017 until after the Super Bowl, February of 2018. And then when we were done talking about football, that's all we talked about. Parker basically said, all right, we'll do one article, and we'll see how it goes. What do you want to write about? I said, I want to write about the politics of right field in 1973, Pittsburgh Pirates spring training. He's like, I know all about that. So we did that article, and the Sporting News published it, and Parker received accolades from friends, family, former players, and they said, all right, let's do the book. And that's kind of how it began.
Very cool.
Yeah. In terms of our collaborative process, it was every Sunday we would talk for 45 50 minutes, and for about a year, we would have this like set date. I would come out once a quarter, and we would spend 3 days just talking. And we would go for 6 hours and get some lunch, go for another like 2 or 3 hours, and then go get dinner. And we just really, really bonded well. He also had the Pirates basically open up the 1979 Rolodex. So I
Hmm.
ended up speaking to over 75 players. The Reds were great. They introduced me to guys like Barry Larkin, Eric Davis, and a number Cal Daniels I was friends with previously. And basically, it was 75 players, coaches, managers, his high school coaches. I became very good friends with his high school guidance counselor, who at 86 is still with us. And so it was a really deep. Parker really, really um, flattered me once, and he just said, "You and me, we a super group." And it was really special to hear that. So, if you want to ask, was it a collaborative process? Absolutely.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, and you mentioned the guidance counselor, Mrs. I
Miss
can't remember.
Kugel, yeah.
Miss Kugel. Yeah, he talks a lot about her in the book, and I think there's even some pictures of her, and that was neat. It's cool that you got to talk to her too. And when he spent all those hours with you telling his story, I thought one of the most impressive things about the book was just the level of detail for stuff that happened like 50 plus years ago. He talks, for example, about what song was on the radio the first time he met Doc Ellis at a dive bar in Bradenton. Did he? Yeah, I know you talked to other people too, but did he have like journals or things like that that helped him remember details, or was he just one of those people that had a steel trap mind?
He for what he was going through, and he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2012. He still had these crazy memories. We talked a lot about the music. Obviously, a lot of the titles of the chapters are based on songs that he listened to at the time and that were significant at the time. So yeah, there was a lot of these and we played a lot of songs, and we would play something like "My Mistake" by Marvin Gaye and Diana Ross, and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, that was." I remember being in the car and talking to this woman, whatever, at the time, and that was a very prominent song. And we focused on songs that were that became time capsules that were number one for 2 or 3 weeks and then never played again. And there's a lot of songs like that out there, like that Marvin Gaye song that was very popular, that people haven't heard in 30, 40 years. So you hear it now, and it just opens these time traps for you. And we found that to be an effective device for composing the book.
Hey, David, it's Steve. Hey, just a question. You talked about his love for football and unfortunately the Cincinnati Bengals for him, but I remember reading in the book he actually played high school and gotten hurt in one of his knee injuries. If he doesn't get that knee injury in high school, do you think he does go play for Ohio State instead of maybe following the baseball route there?
And I think that they turn him into a tight end. Absolutely. At 100%. He loved nothing more than football. And we wanted to convey that love of football in the early chapters. And that's why there's so much in about his high school days, about how much he loved football. And he just loved talking about his high school days. I mean, he went full Al Bundy for a number of sessions. We sat down and he just talked about, scoring the touchdowns and the friends that he played with and whatnot. Um, his time in high school really formed a lot of the basis of who he was.
He, yeah, his story is full of ups and downs. The high school injury and what happened there. He talks about how he couldn't make the big league club those first few years. I think at one point he even says, yeah, he went home to Cincinnati to basically quit baseball altogether. And I thought all of that to me makes him very relatable for
Hmm.
being a star athlete. Were those all those different challenges that he had? Was that difficult for him to open up about all that?
It's funny. He's such a level-headed guy, and when we first sat down about the book, I told him, I was like, look, you did a lot, man, and people know you did a lot, and both good and bad, and it's just if you want this thing to resonate the way I know you want it to resonate, you're gonna. And he just looked at me, opened his arms, and was like, I'm right here. Let's talk. So and also the fact is that he was in such a good place. I mean, obviously, Parkinson's notwithstanding, in terms of family and the love and his life, that he was easy to, like, things were hard. It was probably the hardest about high school because he loved football so much. But other than that, he was pretty easygoing about the whole thing, and he was ready to tell an honest story.
He got very, very honest in the book, and there's dozens of examples of that. One that's stuck out to me was the story about what happened with his girlfriend. I think her name was Pamela.
Hmm.
Literally in the middle of the 1979 postseason. I mean, this is when the Pirates are making their run for a championship. And I won't spoil that for folks who haven't read the book, but needless to say, it's some real heavy stuff. And I believe he says in the book he's never told that story until now.
Yeah, I mean, he talked a little bit about in very vague terms on different not so much podcasts but documentaries and whatnot about the vandalism to his house and this and that. It was a little tense and it was a little tough. And I also had the other side of that story was his relationship with the agent Tom Rich, who was very prominent in his life in the late 70s and early to mid 80s for a stretch of about 10 years. I sat with Tom Rich for a week in his home in Sarasota. I became very close with Tom. I very nearly ended up writing a book with Tom. So when you read Cobra, it's really also informed by the experiences of Parker's agent, and you get a second side of things that happen there.
Um, I think one of the things we talked about, stories, and it's one of the things we love on this podcast is digging up stories that people have probably never heard before. And so this book has a plethora of just great stories like that. Um, like we said, some are deep and heavy, but then there's just some like he conveys a story where he went out to eat with Emery wearing his full Pirates uniform. There's some really funny stories. How did you guys determine what kind of stories made it into the book and what did not? And is there a director's cut with the leftover stories somewhere?
Well, the problem was that the book ended up being about 229,000 words that we submitted to the publisher. And the publisher who gave us kind of the run of the place just said, guys, we can't do this. It's crazy. So it ultimately became like it was a 178,000 word book, but a lot of things got cut out of that. And there was some other relationship stuff we had to cut. We had to cut the 88, 89, and 90, 91 seasons down substantially. Basically, I'm on the Facebook, a baseball books Facebook group, and it's like 13,000 people. We ran an informal poll in there saying, what do you guys want to read in a Dave Parker book? And overwhelmingly, it was Pirates, Reds, drug trials. So that's kind of where we focused everything. And that was the idea. We tried to fit in every great story. I spent maybe 10 hours on the phone with Larry Demery a couple years before he passed. So a lot of stuff was really informed, not just from Parker's perspective, or at least it was fortified by the perspectives of his teammates and friends.
Yeah, the time with the Pirates I can see being popular, especially in Pittsburgh. And I thought what was really kind of a through line in the book was how much the Pirates were truly a family. Like they had that theme of family, but that really came across in the book. And they took so much pride in being Pirates. And I think that was evident the way he talks so much about his relationship with his teammates. I think it comes out when he talks about how much winning mattered to everyone. There's even a story about there was an old guy at batting practice in spring training one day who everybody wanted to talk to, and the old guy ended up being Pie Trainer. Like it really meant something special to be a pirate back then, didn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that was fostered by the organization. Um, they back in like 68, 69, they began working out of Pirate City in Bradenton, which is, at that time was one part state of the art facility and one part 3-star Howard Johnson's. And they all basically stayed together with the exception of married players. Everybody else dormed together. They ate together. They hung out together. They ran around together. It truly was a family organization. And that's way before 1979.
Yeah, and then he also talks about, and he really accentuates this point. I think he even says like if he has one takeaway, it's this: it's how much Danny Murtaugh and Joe Brown supported the black players. Do you think that was something? I guess why do you think that's something he really wanted to accentuate?
Well, it was important at a time with things were going on and George Floyd and whatnot, and he wanted to talk about the positive aspect of the black experience, and it's
Hmm.
really he's had an absolutely positive life with all of his friends, and he wanted to talk about the brotherhood. He wanted to talk about the friendship and love between these men, and that was extremely important to him. And it's in the title of the book. It was a very significant journey that he went under.
Yeah, he seemed to have what did he think of Chuck Tanner? Just just describe his relationship with Chuck Tanner.
Oh, Chuck Tanner! Chuck Tanner adored Parker. He absolutely adored him. Um, we're actually in the midst of I'm in the midst of finishing off a book that I was working on with Parker, a second book that really, really underlines Tanner's affection for Parker that I'm not going to really get into here, but he absolutely loved Parker. He fought for him. When Parker tried to bowl over John Stearns, everybody was kind of all the media t types were saying, did Parker do something wrong? And Tanner, as you'll see read in the book, basically said Dave Parker plays every game like it's the seventh game of the series, and he runs out every ground ball, and I support him 100%.
Yeah, and I think Tanner even I'm trying to remember who the player was. Might have been Madlock, but Tanner even wanted Parker's opinion before they went out and got that player.
Yeah, because the thing was, Parker knew Madlock going back to 1971, where they had an incident as minor league opponents, and then they were together. They were on a same team in the Dominican Republic in Winter Ball in '73. Madlock got into a situation, and Parker kind of helped get him out. So they were tight players throughout the league for many years. And then and there was a time in '79 where Madlock was in San Francisco. He was unhappy, and Tanner called in Parker and Stargell and basically said, "So we're thinking about Madlock. We heard he beat the stuffins out of Bo McLaughlin on the Braves last night. What's the deal with him?" And Parker's like, "You going to get Mad Dog? Go get him. Go get him. Go get him." And that was it. That was just you're like, "You sure?" Like, just go get him. Don't even think twice.
Yeah, and that's to be at that level on and especially on a championship team, right? Like to be that level of leadership and respected, where the manager and the front office literally has reservations about going out and getting a player, but they're like, okay, but let's ask Dave Parker. I mean, and it's funny because he walks you through that whole process of, obviously he didn't start out that way. Obviously he started out as this, by his own admission, kind of arrogant rookie that thought he was, deserved to make the team the first year. But then he had Clemente and Stargell and the guys that were the leaders then, and again, even like Pie Train or people like that, kind of guiding him through. And then when it came, later in his career, he was able to assume that mantle, right?
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And then I really love the crossover that Pie Trainer was around long enough to overlap with Parker, and that was when I heard that story. That was just fantastic. And there were so many people, even Bob Veal, who was the great black left-handed pitcher for the Pirates in the '60s and very early '70s. He was around long enough to influence Parker and to guide him. Like they would go out one night and they'd be like, "Hey, Chutney, you gonna come out with us?" And Veal would say things like, I'm not wasting my dollars on thoughtless nights and things like that." Or forgetful evenings and things of that nature. So he had so many different role models in the black community on the team, and in addition to Joe Brown and Denny Merton and ultimately Chuck Tanner. So that was kind of how that went.
Yeah, and he talks a lot in the book about Doc Ellis. I thought that was interesting. Doc Ellis was a much bigger presence. I think all of us in Pittsburgh know that Doc Ellis was certainly a unique personality and all that kind of stuff. And everybody talks about the no hitter when he was high and all that kind of stuff. But boy, he really goes into detail about really making you understand what a larger than life presence Doc was in the clubhouse. Was his relationship with Doc something that he talked about a lot, and was that something he wanted to accentuate in the book?
Dave Parker had a photo on him, for most of the his life in the last like 20, 30 years, just of him and Doc Ellis. He kept it in his wallet. And Doc meant so much to him. And it was, and this is kind of what we explore in the second book, is the relationship of Doc Ellis and Willie Stargell to Parker. And, you know, one is, it's almost like something from Animal House. One is the angel on his shoulder, and one's the wisecracking devil. But they're both highly intelligent, highly insightful. And Doc really taught Parker so much about life and hanging out and this and that. And you really see that everything you know about Doc Ellis and everything you know about Willie Stargell are really combined in Dave Parker. And all of the work that he did with Barry Larkin, Eric Davis, Paul O'Neill, and Cal Daniels in Cincinnati was reflected on what guys like Willie Stargell did. And his time in the early 80s was maybe reflected a little bit on how he learned how to hang out from Doc Ellis. So, you know, in addition to other things. And we actually explore that to a great detail in the second book.
Yeah, you talked about the early 80s stuff. And I think when you guys get into Parker's drug use in the book, there's this very interesting recurring theme, kind of referring to that stuff in like coded phrases or euphemisms. And when you did that, those phrases were always in italics. And I think it even at one point you guys talk about like living life in the italics. Can you talk about the creative thinking behind covering the drug use in that manner?
I mean, there have been a lot of books. I mean, God, I think Doc Gooden's written 3 or 4 books. Daryl's written 3 or 4. He has another one coming out now. There have been a lot of books on athletes and ball players talking about their drug escapades. But, you know, Parker's in many ways kind of a poetic guy. So he's like, I want to do this differently. How are we going to do this differently? And I thought about it and I said, what does it really feel like? And then he said basically, you know, doing cocaine is like living life in italics. So I said, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it. We're not going to use the word until the end, till you stop. So we're going to get cute with it the whole way through those 6 years, those 3 or 4 chapters. And then finally, in the last time, once you stop, that's when you'll tell everybody cocaine is like living life in italics.
Wow. So that kind of represents that struggle, I guess, where when you're in the middle of that, you're not really aware of the full gravity of what it is you're doing to your life. And then at the end, it's more of a reality. Is that kind of what you were going for?
Yeah, it's very accentuated, no doubt about it. And it's an accentuated human experience. And it's just, he wanted to basically walk people through what he was dealing with and how he handled himself and whatnot. And it was part of the whole, you know, honesty package. And he really wanted to not pussyfoot over it. It's, you know, I got a lot of accolades with John D'Acquisto when we wrote Fastball John, calling it one of the most honest baseball portrayals ever written. So just 5 years later, with Cobra, we wanted to take the same journey.
Yeah, and he really does get into that a lot. He says in one time he thought cocaine was like a controllable social activity, which people don't remember. That there was a pretty good period of time there where cocaine was seen like alcohol or cigarettes or whatever. It wasn't this hard drug in people's minds. Then he also talks about, you know, him trying to find a way to cope with a lot of the stuff that he was dealing with in life. You know, that there was an off season, I think it was the 76 off season, where Joe Brown retired and Danny Murtaugh died and a bunch of guys got traded. And, you know, again, like you said, the title of the book, the brotherhood part of the book, that was a difficult transition for him, to lose all those guys that were brothers. And people always talk about, you know, well, it's a business. Sports is a business. And I don't know, maybe modern players feel that way more now. But going back to the whole idea that it was family, was it difficult for him losing teammates, Danny Murtaugh, people like that? That must have been very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, when we people going back and talking about the business of sports, it's much more of a business now than it was then. There were a lot of teams that weren't making money, and there were a lot of teams where the team wasn't the absolute focus of the owner and with the Galbraiths, I mean, they had interests in real estate and construction and this and that and insurance. And the Pirates, it almost seemed like they lost money, like in the 70s. For the first 5 years of the 70s, they lost money as a team. And it almost seemed like the Pirates were something of like a light tax shelter for the Galbraiths. And that kind of explains why he just, the ownership just let Joe Brown do what he needed to do. It's like, if you make a little money, yay, that's great. If you lose a little money, not a big deal. Don't lose a lot of money, but you kind of have you have the run of the place. You get to do whatever you want for the most part, because he knows Joe Brown wasn't a reckless guy, but Joe Brown had a lot of leeway to do what he wanted, and Danny Murtaugh was his guy. Danny Murtaugh was his best friend. And even when Murtaugh was having health issues and quit in 71, you have 1973 comes around. The Houston Astros manager is Leo DeRocher. They're looking to get rid of him. And ownership starts talking to Danny Murtaugh. And I had this confirmed by some family members that, they were far along, and Joe Brown turns around and Verdon's fighting with Richie Hebner, and the team's not in first place. They're having their issues. So he just goes to Danny Murtaugh and says, you got to come back. I forget about whatever you're doing. You got to come back. And that's kind of what happened there. Why Verdon was fired, because there was a real talk that Murtaugh was going to Houston.
Yeah, that was very interesting insight. And talking about the money, people might not remember Dave Parker was baseball's first $1 million player, and I believe at that time the only other person in sports making more than Dave Parker was Muhammad Ali. And he talks a lot about kind of the journey to get his contract. And again, this is a very different, especially baseball, because you had the collusion in the 80s, you had the reserve clause for all those years. I mean, baseball was not, this thing where the Dodgers signed guys for $1 gazillion, this is a very recent thing in the course of baseball history. So for him to get that contract, that was a lot of back and forth. That was a little bit of good faith on his part with the Pirates, and a little good faith on their part too. What was that journey like for him? Did he have any hard feelings about any of that? I know he shared a little bit of that in the book, but what was that journey like for him trying to get that big contract?
It wasn't so bad. The journey, he didn't have any hard feelings about that aspect of the journey. The hard feelings came in the mid 80s when new ownership came in and tried to get his claw back some of his money. Basically, you had 1976, 77, everybody's starting to get these contracts, and Pete Peterson had basically signed Parker pretty quickly, and Parker jumped at the 3 years, $300,000. And then he's at spring training 77, and guys like Rose and Morgan are busting his chops, saying things to the effect of, why did you sign so soon? You're out of your mind. You're crazy. And then Parker starts seeing all these contracts come up, and these guys getting these monster deals. And you have Goose Gossage on the team saying, I'm not signing anything because I'm going to be a millionaire at the end of the year. And we all know that the Goose only had that one and done season with the Pirates in 77. So he felt a little annoyed about that. But his agent, Tom Rich, just reassured him, you're going to get paid. Somebody is going to pay you. And I like to think that, and I've talked a couple times to Dave Winfield about this, that had Parker gone to free agency, he would have gotten that contract that Winfield got in 1980, when Winfield got the 10 years, $20 million with the Yankees. George Steinbrenner was very enamored with Parker, and he was probably going to sign him in the winter of 79 if Parker was available. And we all know that Parker signed that previous winter in 78.
I going back to like the drug use, I found Parker said something insightful when he said the first time he did drugs was I think it was in an airplane, or it was after a World Series, after the 79 World Series. And a person had given him, whoever it was had given him, the drugs. And he said, when you get something for free, that the product is you. And I've said that's extremely insightful. That, it's very interesting. I found that quote, just about, obviously dealing with addiction and such, that, they aren't selling so much the product you're using. They're just trying to get you hooked. on the product.
Yeah, yeah, and that was the thing. He was the guy he called the medicine man, and Parker really handled that in a very classy way. That these guys who were dealing and involved with drug distribution in the late '70s, early '80s, kind of had gone to jail. They'd paid their debt to society. So we were like, look, if anybody wants to know these guys' names, there's internet, there's YouTube, there's the Cocaine 7 book. They could find it very easily. So we wanted to handle that in a very classy and again, creative, literary, poetic manner. And that was kind of how we handled that with both the medicine man and quote unquote the chef in later chapters.
Once again, folks, the book is called Cobra: A Life of Baseball and Brotherhood. It's available on Amazon. It's available in local bookstores, and it's available via the links we have in the show description. To Steve's point about the insightful quote, I think um, there's a lot of good life lessons in the book. Was that intentional as you guys were writing this, or did it just come across as part of the story?
Well, Parker had a very, very eventful life, and he did want to impart um, some life lessons on people. And we even reference that in the beginning of the book. We say, if you want to share these life lessons with your children and grandchildren, that's great. We know the language gets a little salty here and there, but there are lessons and things to be learned about life. And as a 71-year-old man, he wanted to impart that on everybody.
Yeah, and I think that really comes across. It's not just a collection of stories, and there's a lot in there about him, you know, wild nights and parties and you know clubs and all that stuff. But I don't think it's without being able to glean some like I said life lessons off of it.
Yeah, yeah, that was really, he wanted. I mean, when you're going to write a book, he wanted to tell his stories, and he was a master storyteller, and he wanted to really take people on a trip through the '70s, and I believe that we did that, and we wanted to be as specific as we could, and he wanted to be specific and tell some of these really cool stories, like the one with going to the barbecue place up on the hill in his uniform, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, and things of that nature. It's just he wanted to sit down and talk about his life, and he was a man in full, so it was important to him.
Um, what was Dave's relationship later with Pete Rose? Because obviously he went to Cincinnati after the Pirates, and did he have any knowledge of all the stuff Pete was doing on the side there, or have any suspicions ever, or anything that there's any way you can speak to any of that?
They were very similar. They came from similar type of neighborhoods. They were both, Cincinnati was one of the most integrated cities in America at the time, the 40s, 50s, 60s. And basically, they kind of knew each other. They knew each other in different circles. And Pete went to a competing high school years before Parker, but it maybe like 8 or 9 years beforehand. But they were very, very close at one point, and they both knew each other. They hung out with each other. We had one chapter is called The Ohio Players, where we tell the parallel stories of Pete Rose's free agency ascent and Parker's contract talks with Pittsburgh. So they were pretty tight, and they would hang out at a batting cage in Cincinnati, and Pete would say, "I'm getting paid. You need to get paid." And Parker was like, "I'm a bucko for life." And then Pete looked him in the eye and said, "That's what I said. You got to get paid." So they were very tight. And then when he came, Parker really vouched for Rose to come back in Cincinnati in '84, and that worked really well until it didn't. And Rose basically came in and said, "Look, you're going to handle the players and just be my co-manager," and he actually used that term. And the problem was that his plan worked too well, that so many of the players began listening more to Parker than to Pete, and that got Pete a little jealous. Is really what happened, and ultimately, Cincinnati ended up trading Parker in '87 to Oakland. And I'll tell you a funny story. I ran into Pete Rose at a book signing, like about a year before the Cobra was published, and we talked and we talked, and I said, I'm doing a book with Dave Parker, and I got his number. I called him. He didn't pick up. I texted him. He didn't respond. Left it unopened. And then about 4 or 5 months later, I'm at home one day, and it's like 11 o'clock in the afternoon, or 11 o'clock in the morning, and I look at my phone, and it pops up, Charlie Hustle. I pick up, and I hear this voice. I hear the Pete voice saying, I'm in a limo from Vegas going to LA. I got 3 hours. Go."
Wow.
So me and Pete talked for 3 hours, and when we ended the conversation, I did ask him about the trade, and of course, typical Pete fashion, oh, I don't remember that. But everything else,
Mhm.
he knew like a steel trap. And at the end of the call, he said, "Tell Dave I said hi." "No, tell him I love him."
Hmm.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Pete kind of came across as a mentor for him for a lot of years almost, and he said he needed to go get paid. I think I remember him also saying, like, you need to have a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a plan. Don't just assume you're going to be there for life and they're just going to keep re-upping your contract and giving you more and more money every time. So yeah, that was interesting. I mean, I think the very first paragraph of the book is, him talking about Pete Rose, because it's the day that Pete breaks the hit record and Dave Parker's in Pittsburgh for the drug trials.
Yeah, when I heard that was the day, and when I looked, we all grew up during that time or whatever. But when you see specific dates and you go back and you look, you're like, holy crap, it's
Mm-hmm.
September 11th, 1985, the day that Pete Rose breaks the hit record. Parker's spending the morning in a court in downtown Pittsburgh. Um, I said, that's we got. I said we got to open the book there.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, we talked about it, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool if the first words in Parker's book is apologizing to Pete Rose, the man who spent the latter part of his life, signing baseball, saying, "I'm sorry." We thought it would be cool to start it off with having Parker apologize to Pete.
No. Did I noticed, like, Parker, like, really a great depth of knowledge about baseball. He just, really seemed one of the smarter players. Like, I mean, I've read Ball 4 and other books like that, and it just really, his baseball knowledge comes through. Did he ever consider getting into manager or coaching at all in baseball?
He coached 1 year with the Angels. He coached a following year with Tony La Russa, his former manager at Oakland, when they were at St. Louis in 1998, when McGwire hit the 70 homers. Which he doesn't totally take credit for that, but he felt like that he had a little influence. He had been with McGwire in Oakland as a teammate, so they had a nice rapport that he basically would point things out to McGwire during that season to keep him on track. So he felt real pride in that. But for the most part, he's a really intelligent baseball player. Let me give you an example. He in spring trainings, he would recognize that certain pitchers needed to show the one thing that young pitchers needed to show in spring training was velocity. If they didn't have velocity, they weren't going to the big club. They weren't getting promoted. So the first thing they needed to do when they faced a hitter in spring training was throw heat. So Parker knew he was getting first pitch heat in just about every at bat in spring training, and he just feasted on it. He had the talent and the skill and the ability to hit any fastball that came to him. So he would have these stats in spring training, batting 350 here and 400 there, and so when they would try to demote him, he would fight back and say, "I batted 350," and granted, people would say, yeah, it's spring training numbers, but the fact was that Parker always lit it up in spring training because he recognized the need of the pitchers to just throw fastballs.
Yeah, and I think he even talks about like there was almost like a aha moment when he like unlocked that secret. So that was cool. That inside knowledge. He also really opens up about the stuff that happened between him and the fans in the 80s. He talks about he would get racist hate mail almost every day. He talks about when the fan threw the battery at him at Three River Stadium and how he literally had to pull himself out of the game for his own safety. and then at the end of the book, he kind of, talks about his love for Pittsburgh, and it kind of feels like time has healed a lot of those wounds. Where do you think he really was at the end of his life about all that? I mean, I always, when I read stuff like that, it sounds very nice on paper. It's like, oh, this was a very hard time and the fans were pretty cruel. But a lot of the fans were nice, and looking back, I love them. But I feel like it's probably more complex than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like when we were all hanging out for a reunion of the '79 players, he still had a little anger at some of the fans in '80 and '81 who were a little disrespectful. And we talked about this at length. He would say like, well, Willie Stargell would often say, I got hate mail in '64, '65. Fans threw things at me in the in the mid '60s. And Parker then would say, but they didn't love you first. And they
Hmm.
loved Parker first. And they loved him in '74. And they loved it. They really loved him in '75 and '76. And then, things got complicated with free agency. And everybody talks about the Western Pennsylvania economy in '78 and '79 and whatnot, and the resentment of a black athlete getting $1 million a year. But it was really the fact that he just kind of got rich in front of everybody, and that kind of bothered a few people. In the Cobra Twilight documentary, I think Joe Green says it best. When you're in a stadium of 30,000 people, you don't hear the 29,000 people, 29,500 people cheering for you. You hear the 500 people booing you.
Oh boy.
You know, and then that's kind of what happened there. But Parker, the Pirates absolutely treated him like gold in his final years, and they rolled out the gold carpet for him whenever he came to town, and he was treated like a favorite son in the last decade of his life, and the fans just simply adored him every time he showed his face at PNC Park. So I think I think those wounds were for the most part healed.
What do you think it was about the fans? Because here in Pittsburgh, it's weird. We I'll say this, even up till today, fans fans seem to get very hurt by any time a player wants more money.
Hmm.
Yeah, and which is kind of odd because it's not our money, right? It's an owner's money.
Yeah.
But I even very recently, Cam Hayward for the Steelers, who's beloved, who's been on the Steelers for years and years and years, had a very mini, I don't know, 3 day, I forget what it was, holdout in training camp. And you go on social media and it's just, whatever. He can go home. He's playing a game for money. I work in a mill and I don't get paid that much. I mean, people just get so angry about it. Do you think it was a lot of that kind of stuff? You mentioned like especially at the time, man, people were struggling economically. Do you think it was race? Do you think it was all of the above?
Well, they both probably the best answer, and I think whatever the talk radio was, the I guess the social media of the time, and just that, or letters to the editor
Yeah.
was the social
Yeah.
media of the time. That's what that
Yeah,
was.
we always read letters of the editor when we do research for the pot, and some of them are. It's pretty much like what you would read on Facebook. Just same stuff. It's funny, like 50 years later, people have not changed at
No, not
all.
at all, not at
Yeah,
all. And
it's like people, like everybody on the internet acts like we just discovered all this like yesterday. It's like no, this has been going on. You go back to the 1925 World Series, and you'll
yep,
see silliness like this. Yeah,
yeah, 100%. I mean, it's just it's the same kind of sentiment. There's just a fire hose now, is really what
Mhm.
it is.
Yeah.
And I think that the people that are sad or unhappy in their lives manifest themselves in politics and sports. And if they're
Mhm.
unhappy about something in their own life, they'll nitpick the things that they are angry about and shout it through their own personal bullhorn.
Well, it definitely like I can see like with everything going on, like all the mills were closing, like in the late '70s, early '80s, and here you already have like a guy that there's always going to be those racial tensions, especially back
Yes,
then.
yes,
And then you add in now he's making money while you're losing your job. And it was okay when Dave Parker was just a guy, maybe not making that much, but now you add in the racial component, and he's rich, and yeah, you got a lot of reasons to not like a guy. And he always hustled. Like it just, I don't get it. My dad loved Dave Parker. Said how great he was. He threw. Was it in the All-Star game? He threw that guy out at home plate. Was that?
Brian Downing at home plate, Jim Rice at third base. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And my dad said he was one of the greatest fielders he ever saw. It's like unbelievable. Yeah, such a talent. Yeah, five-tool player.
Yeah, no doubt. And I can't deny that there's a racial element there, but and there are other towns where Mike Schmidt was one of the highest paid players in the late 70s, and he got berated by the fans in Philadelphia. So there was the element, there was economic resentment plus a little a layer of racial anger as well. But there were a lot of players that heard it from the fans after they got their big deals.
Hmm. Speaking of things he might have been feeling some resentment over, and I don't think that he got into this too much in the book, but at the time that the book came out, he still was not in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
What were his feelings on that?
Every so often, we'd be home at his place watching a football game or this or that, or going over the book stuff, and he would just say, "Man, I should be in the Hall of Fame." And part of the Parker family, there was like in the foundation, there was a real push to get into the Hall of Fame. That really wasn't my element with him. It was just we were just we became like buddies and this and that. But I would say to him like, look, how many ball players out there got 2 batting titles and a ring in each league? He's like, nobody. Who's got 2 batting titles, trip Gold Gloves, and a ring in each league? Nobody. And then I would say, who had more fun after midnight, Parkway? And he'd laugh and he'd be like, let's just go to PF Chang's. And he would forget about it. So it was, it was there because these guys were his contemporaries. I mean, you go back to the baseball cards, it's him and Rod Carew back to back for a couple of years, and the batting champion, the batting leaders baseball card. And that's what he sees because he gets maybe 5 or 6 baseball cards every 2 days in the mail. And every day he's reminded, you were a batting champ with Hall of Famer Rod Carew. You and Rod Carew are contemporaries and elite, teammates in success and stardom and whatnot. Keith Hernandez, for our book, told me that at that time, Dave Parker was the best player of his generation. So when you hear these things over and over and over again, you believe I should be in that room too. If everybody thinks that way, I should be in that room too.
Yeah. Yeah. It there was a book that came out in like the very early 80s, and it was, I think it was the 100, but it was like the 100 greatest baseball players of all time. Mm. And it had Babe Ruth, and it had, all the, Dave Parker was in that book. And for a guy to be that highly regarded at that midpoint of his career, and then, people don't remember he was really good with Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. In those years he went to the Reds. So he had kind of like a renaissance second half of his career. Do you think it was all the drug trial stuff that kept him out of the Hall of Fame for as long as it did?
I do believe that. I went back and I looked at the numbers through a sabermetric lens, and basically there's never been a ball player who hit the heights that Parker did and then the lows that Parker did and then rose like a phoenix in the way that he did. Doc Gooden never did it. Darryl never did it. Dick Allen never did it. There's nobody. The great Lonnie Smith kind of approached it a little bit, but nobody had ever hit the wins above replacement numbers that Parker did, and then went to nothing, and then went back up. Yeah. It's never been done.
Yeah. I'm looking at his stats right there, and you're nailed right in the head. Like he has these down years, and then he goes to Cincinnati, and he finds himself again. What was it? Just health or getting clean? A little bit of both. What do you attribute his resurgence in Cincinnati to?
It helped that he was home. It helped that he got to see his family. He got married in '84. He had a whole family there. Everybody was there. Every day he played a game at the ballpark, it was a family reunion, a high school reunion. He was home, and he lived literally 15 minutes from the park. And you go right down 75 or 71, and you get right to Riverfront Stadium, and it was an amazing commute to work for half the season. So he was so thrilled to be with his family and home every day. Basically, when we talk about his favorite season of all time, what was your favorite season? All in, everything in. He said 1984 because he was home. I mean, he loved the seasons with the Pirates and whatnot, but in terms of pure joy in the moment, it was being able to see his parents and his brothers and sisters and his family and his cousins and high school buddies and whatnot. And, going back home really reinvigorated him. I wanted to tell a story, and I love that, with your podcast, the Pittsburgh Sports Memories. I was presenting at the Hall of Fame this past February, and I created a formula that basically determined the most exciting competitive World Series of all time. And on that list is the Pittsburgh Pirates and Orioles in '79. And I asked Kent DeColvey. I was putting everything together. I had about 5 to like an hour before I was presenting, and I didn't think I had enough. So I had Kent DeColvey's number. I called him and I asked him, why did you pitch to Eddie Murray instead of Singleton in Game 7? And he said, I said, why did you choose to do that? He said, I didn't choose. Chuck Tanner did. And he told me, don't give Murray anything good to hit, but don't walk him. So pitch him safe. And basically what happened was Eddie Murray had gone like 4 for 5 in games 1 and 2. And then in the 8th inning, he slid into second base and messed up his wrist. And nobody knew about this, but his wrist was hurting him. So he comes up to the plate in game 3, and he has a completely different stance. And Ed Ott noticed the stance. And he told Chuck Tanner, and he told all the pitchers, and they pitched Murray differently. Murray couldn't swing the way he normally did. He couldn't use his hands the way he wanted to because of his bad wrist. So he needed to make this adjustment in the batter's box to leverage more power. And when Murray was looking for a pitch out over the plate, he was looking to hit it the other way because his hands weren't working well. He'd close the stance. When he was looking for a pitch in, he would open the stance. So Ott told Nicosia, he told Tanner. So they pitched Murray completely differently. He went from being 4 for 5 with a double, a home run, and 5 walks to 0 for 21 and 4 strikeouts.
Wow, that's a great story.
That's a story that's never been told.
Wow, that's awesome. You would have thought, if going back and recounting that situation, I probably would have thought, well, we all know Eddie Murray is the Hall of Fame all-time great player, but in 1979 he was at the very beginning of his career, so maybe he wasn't, maybe just the Pirates weren't aware of how good he was, but it sounds like they were, and I believe he was already an all-star and he was pretty good by that point. So it's interesting that there was a lot more to that than just well, we're not as scared of this guy as we should be.
And it was funny because the previous game, DeColvey struck out Singleton with an overhand curveball, which is something he had never thrown before. And Ott said, "This is a good time. Why don't you just throw overhand?" And he threw the sign down and he just threw overhand and struck him out. And it's funny you should say that because DeColvey did say, "I didn't know Murray was a Hall of Famer in 1979. I just knew he was a great hitter." So that was that interesting little story.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. Yeah.
I thought you'd appreciate that. But no, we basically I was working with Parker on the second book when he passed, and basically it's called Kings Island, and it's the story of Doc the 1974 season. It's like Parker always wanted a diary book. Like Reggie had a diary book in '74, Pete had a diary book in '74, and obviously that Ball 4 was a diary book a few years before that. Parker had always wanted one, and so finally we decided for the second book that's what we're going to do and just focus on '74. And it's this real trip through Pittsburgh and the culture at that time. Like Dick Primanti is a character in the book. Joe Gilliam is a character in the book. These are people that Parker knew. Walt Harper for the Jazz Club was a character. Fred Rogers is a character. They go see movies at the Stanley Theater. Dinners at Lamont, top of the Triangle, the Colony and Green Tree. It's that kind of story, and it's also about how Doc Ellis and Willie Stargell make a bet during spring training over who will become the first black manager in baseball. So we kind of focus on that as like the definitive journey and chronicle that story. So that's kind of what we were working on at the time of his passing.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So folks, once again, the book's called Cobra, A Life of Baseball and Brotherhood. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it in bookstores. And again, we'll have links in the show description. Dave, I wanted to wrap this up by asking you, what do you think Dave Parker's legacy is specifically here in Pittsburgh? Because what I've seen as a fan over the years is that when someone leaves on, what we consider bad terms, then people tend to let that sometimes cloud all the good stuff they did. Specifically, I'm thinking of guys like Barry Bonds or Antonio Brown. And I hope that's not the case for Dave Parker. I don't think it has been in more recent years, but what do you think his legacy is?
One of the coolest players to ever wear the Bucco uniform, who also helped us get a ring.
Well said. Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Again, tremendous book, folks. If you love baseball, especially if you were a fan back then, but even if you're like Steve and I and you're a little young to remember a lot of the specifics of the 70s, it's such a great read. Really highly recommend it. Go out and get it. And Dave, again, thank you so much.
Tim, Steve, this was an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much. This was really a treat. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, so much for listening to our little show here. Please check us out on social media on Facebook or Instagram. Please, if whatever podcast service you're listening on has a option to rate the show, please do that, as it really helps other people find our show. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.